You're sitting in your living room, sipping tea, maybe scrolling through your phone. The world feels normal. But what if, while you're watching this video, military jets are already returning from a mission that could shape the next decade of global politics? On June 21, 2025, the United States launched targeted airstrikes on 3 nuclear facilities deep inside Iran: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. These aren't just military bases. They are among the most guarded and symbolically powerful sites in Iran's nuclear infrastructure. President Donald Trump, in his second term, announced that the strikes were successful and that the U.S. aircraft were now safely out of Iranian airspace. In his statement, he ended with a striking line: "Now is the time for peace." That sentence raises an uncomfortable question. Does bombing another country's nuclear sites bring peace, or provoke a wider war? Some people cheered. Others panicked. Many weren't sure what to think at all. It's moments like this that make us ask, how much do we really understand about the world we live in? And how can learning English help us understand not just the language, but the complex reality behind the words? This isn't just a lesson in vocabulary. It's a chance to explore how political decisions, media narratives, and global tensions intersect, and how you, as an English learner, can become not just a speaker, but a thinker. So let me ask you, have you ever seen a moment in history unfold and felt powerless to interpret it? Have you ever read a headline and thought, what does this really mean? That's what we're here to explore, together. Because what happened between the United States and Iran isn't just about bombs. It's about how power is shown, how diplomacy breaks down, and how ordinary people, like you and me, absorb, question, or ignore the messages we're given. This airstrike didn't happen randomly. It came after months of increasing tension. Iran had recently refused to rejoin nuclear negotiations. Israeli intelligence reportedly uncovered new activity inside the Fordow facility. And international watchdogs were warning that uranium enrichment had reached dangerous levels. Still, even with all that pressure, most people didn't expect real military action. The world has grown used to talks, threats, then more talks. But on June 21st, words were replaced by warplanes. And now, we face the question that headlines alone can't answer. Was this a strategic warning meant to restore balance, or the first step toward chaos? In the next part, we'll examine the paradox, the claim that this attack is meant to prevent war. Can peace really be enforced by precision airstrikes? Or are we witnessing the beginning of something far more unstable? Let's keep exploring. Let's keep thinking. And let's keep learning, not just English, but how to listen, how to analyze, and how to understand the world more clearly. Shall we continue? The official message from the U.S. government is clear. These strikes were necessary to prevent Iran from crossing a dangerous line. According to military sources, Iran was on the brink of producing weapons-grade uranium. Diplomatic channels had failed. So the logic was simple: strike now to avoid a future nuclear war. But here's the paradox. Can peace be preserved through violence? Can dropping bombs on a sovereign nation, without United Nations approval, truly be considered a defensive act? This is the question that now divides global opinion. To some, it's a bold and necessary step, showing that the West will not allow another rogue nuclear state. To others, it's an act of aggression that violates international law and sets a dangerous precedent. Iran, of course, has condemned the strikes, calling them a criminal act of war. What makes this even more complicated is how quickly narratives shift. Less than a decade ago, the Iran nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA, was seen as a diplomatic victory. Iran agreed to limit its nuclear activities in exchange for the lifting of sanctions. There was optimism, even cautious hope. But that deal collapsed, piece by piece, through political changes, mistrust, and a lack of enforcement. And now, here we are. Ask yourself, if a country backs out of diplomacy, does that automatically justify military action? And more broadly, who gets to decide what counts as a threat? These are not just military questions. They are questions about global ethics, sovereignty, and the use of force in a world that claims to support peace. Let's also talk about language for a moment. Think about how this event is being described in the media. Surgical strikes. Strategic deterrence. Restoring balance. Each of these phrases softens the impact. It makes something violent sound clean, calculated, even necessary. But behind those phrases are real lives, real destruction, and real consequences. This is one reason why learning English is so important, not just for travel or career, but to understand the language of power. Because in times like this, the way things are said often hides the full meaning. So what do you think? Is the world safer today because of these strikes? Or have we just taken one more step toward a larger, more uncontrollable conflict? In the next part, we'll begin to break down what's happening on the surface, how governments, media, and public opinion are reacting, and what this tells us about the times we're living in. Let's continue. Just hours after the airstrikes were confirmed, a familiar cycle began. News channels around the world broke into live coverage. Military analysts appeared on screen, pointing at maps. Words like containment, deterrence, and regional stability filled the headlines. Government officials released carefully worded statements. On social media, hashtags like #IranStrikes and #GlobalSecurity started trending. If you followed global news before, this may feel oddly familiar, almost like a script. And that's the first surface-level phenomenon worth noticing. We have developed a pattern for responding to crisis, especially military conflict, with polished language and emotional distance. Let's break it down a bit more. In the United States, reactions were sharply divided. Supporters of the administration praised the strikes as a demonstration of strength and clarity. Critics warned that the action was reckless and could trigger retaliation. Congress held an emergency session, with some lawmakers demanding to know whether there was a long-term strategy, or if this was just another display of force without direction. In Iran, thousands took to the streets in protest. The government vowed revenge but stopped short of declaring war. Iranian state media emphasized national unity, painting the U.S. as an aggressor. Meanwhile, the families living near Natanz and Esfahan began evacuating due to fears of radiation or future strikes. Internationally, allies like the UK and France urged calm. China and Russia condemned the attack outright, calling it a violation of sovereignty. Israel, though not officially involved, signaled its support, stating that the U.S. had done what needed to be done. These reactions form a global echo chamber. Different governments respond in different ways, but the structure remains the same. Justify, condemn, analyze, wait. But what about ordinary people? On TikTok, young creators made videos explaining the history of the Iran nuclear deal in 60 seconds. On YouTube, commentators discussed potential World War III scenarios. Twitter, or X, as it's now branded, saw memes, misinformation, and panic mixed together in real time. And in the middle of all this noise, the truth becomes harder to find. That's the second trend worth noticing. Information is abundant, but clarity is scarce. We have more access than ever before. But with access comes overload. It's hard to know what's real, what's exaggerated, and what's being left out. This is where critical thinking matters, and why we're spending this video not just talking about what happened, but exploring how we think about what happened. Ask yourself this. When you first heard about the strikes, what was your reaction? Fear? Curiosity? Indifference? That reaction says something, not just about you, but about how we've been trained to process global events. Here's one more trend. Many people, especially younger generations, have grown emotionally numb to geopolitical conflict. We've heard it all before: strikes, retaliation, escalation, negotiation. It becomes background noise unless it directly affects our lives. But should it? Let me ask you, and I really encourage you to answer this in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. Have we become too comfortable with conflict? Too desensitized to real danger, because it feels far away, or because it's wrapped in expert analysis and digital filters? Think about that. And as we move forward, we'll go deeper, not just into reactions, but into the hidden systems that shape these events and how they're presented. Let's keep going. On the surface, this was a military decision: stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons. But beneath the surface, there are many layers of influence, and none of them are simple. Let's start with politics. Donald Trump, now serving his second term, has made it clear that he views strength as the most important form of diplomacy. He often repeats the phrase, "peace through power." For him and many of his supporters, this airstrike wasn't just about Iran. It was a message to the world that the United States will not tolerate weakness, hesitation, or perceived threats. But political timing matters. Trump's approval ratings had been sliding. Economic anxiety was growing. A show of force on the global stage, especially against a longtime adversary, can have powerful domestic effects. It redirects public attention, rallies national pride, and creates an image of control. So we have to ask, was this attack purely about Iran, or also about restoring authority at home? Now let's look at the economic side. War, or even the threat of war, shifts global markets. After the airstrikes, oil prices surged. Companies linked to defense contracts saw their stock rise. Currencies fluctuated. In times of instability, certain industries benefit, especially energy, weapons, and surveillance technology. That leads us to a tough but necessary question. Who profits from conflict? And are these profits influencing the policies we see on the surface? Throughout history, wars have been justified by moral arguments: freedom, security, justice, but behind many of those wars were economic incentives. Access to oil, control of trade routes, arms sales, reconstruction contracts. Today, things are more complex, but the principle remains: power and profit are often linked. There's another hidden power we should consider: information control. Modern warfare isn't only about missiles, it's about narratives. What people believe is just as important as what actually happens. Governments, intelligence agencies, and media platforms all play a role in shaping the story. For example, before the airstrikes, leaks from anonymous sources suggested Iran was weeks away from a nuclear weapon. But those sources were never fully verified. Still, once repeated enough, the statement shaped public opinion. It created urgency. It softened resistance to military action. This is known as perception management, influencing how the public sees a situation to align with political or strategic goals. And in the digital age, this kind of influence is more powerful than ever. Algorithms decide what we see. They amplify outrage, reward emotion, and reduce complexity. You're more likely to be shown dramatic headlines than thoughtful analysis. That's not a bug, it's by design. So what do we do with all this? First, we stop assuming that what we see is the whole truth. We learn to ask, who benefits from this message? Who's being left out? What questions aren't being asked? And most importantly, we learn to listen carefully, not just to others, but to ourselves. When we accept simple answers to complex problems, it usually means someone else has done the thinking for us. In the next part, we'll explore how people react to these events, not just with logic, but with emotion, fear, loyalty, and habit. We'll look at why it's so easy to accept certain narratives, and so hard to question them. Stay curious. Let's take a step back from governments and global strategy, and look at something more personal. Why do people accept certain versions of truth, even when those truths lead to war? The answer isn't just education or logic. It's emotion, fear, identity, and, surprisingly often, habit. After the airstrikes, polls in the U.S. showed a sharp increase in approval for the president's decision, especially among older voters. These are people who grew up during the Cold War, when national threats were framed in black and white, us versus them, freedom versus tyranny. That mental model, though outdated, is still powerful. It helps people feel safe. It makes the world feel understandable. For younger generations, reactions are more fragmented. Many are skeptical. They've grown up with internet access, exposed to multiple perspectives. But even here, emotion plays a role. Some feel outrage, others feel numb. And many simply scroll past the news entirely. Why? Because when information feels endless, and action feels impossible, apathy becomes a form of emotional survival. And then there's culture. In countries with strong nationalist traditions, military actions are often viewed as patriotic. Questioning the government can be seen as ungrateful or even dangerous. In these contexts, obedience is rewarded. Doubt is discouraged. And the deeper question, is this right? Often gets buried beneath, is this what we've always done? Human psychology is built for stories. And some stories are easier to live with than others. It's easier to believe we are the protectors, and they are the threat, than to accept maybe both sides are afraid. Maybe both sides have made mistakes. It's easier to say they had it coming than to wonder, is there something we could have done differently? This is where language becomes not just a tool, but a trap. Phrases like collateral damage, neutralize the threat, or maintaining deterrence sound clean. But they hide suffering. They hide death. And they allow us to remain emotionally distant from the reality of violence. So let me ask you another question, one that may be uncomfortable but important. When was the last time you questioned your own side's version of the truth? Not because you want to criticize blindly, but because you want to understand fully. This doesn't mean being cynical. It means being awake. Most people aren't taught to think critically about power. We're taught to trust authority, follow tradition, and fear the unknown. But that kind of thinking doesn't lead to peace. It leads to cycles of war, revenge, reconstruction, and more war. In Iran, some young people are now asking their own government hard questions. Why didn't we find a way to make diplomacy work? Are we being used as symbols in a larger game? And those questions, though dangerous to ask, are signs of awakening. In every country, there are people who refuse to accept the official script. Who say, we need to understand what's really going on, not just what we're told. And those voices matter. Because truth isn't built by power. It's built by people, thinking, questioning, connecting. In the next part, we'll talk about what happens when you begin to wake up, when you start to see the bigger picture, and ask, so what can I do? Because awakening doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes, it starts with a simple realization and a story like this. Let's take a moment to pause and breathe. We've talked about politics, military action, media manipulation, and psychology. All of it can feel overwhelming. It's easy to wonder, what difference can I make? I'm just one person, learning English, watching a video. What power do I have? But the truth is, this is exactly where power begins. Not with governments. Not with weapons. But with awareness. Most of the world's biggest changes started with people who saw clearly. People who refused to accept the world exactly as it was presented. People who asked better questions, noticed contradictions, and decided to pay attention, especially when it was easier not to. You don't have to lead a revolution. But you can lead your own awakening. And it starts like this. The next time you see a headline, don't just ask, what happened? Ask, why now? Who benefits? What's missing? The next time someone gives you a simple explanation, they're the enemy, we had no choice, pause. Dig deeper. Look for nuance. And when someone says, don't worry about politics, just live your life, ask yourself, how can we live fully if we don't understand the forces shaping our world? Language is one of the most powerful tools we have. And learning English gives you access to voices, ideas, and stories from across the globe. It lets you listen to opposing views, read original sources, and form your own judgments. That's not just education, it's empowerment. So what's the way forward? Not to panic. Not to pick sides too quickly. But to slow down. To read carefully. To think critically. To speak thoughtfully. Awakening doesn't mean you suddenly know all the answers. It means you become willing to ask harder questions. It means you stop letting emotion, or propaganda, decide your beliefs. And it means you stay curious, even when the world feels chaotic. You might not be able to stop a war. But you can choose not to be fooled. You can choose not to stay silent when something doesn't make sense. You can choose to share truth, quietly, confidently, with those around you. And that ripple effect matters. Because in a world full of noise, a single clear voice, a voice like yours, can make more difference than you think. In the next part, we'll take a brief pause from global affairs and focus on something more practical, the English language itself. We'll highlight key vocabulary, useful expressions, and structures from today's lesson, so you can strengthen your understanding, not just of the world, but of the words we use to describe it. Let's take a moment to review some of the most useful vocabulary and expressions from this lesson. These aren't just words from the news, they are tools for critical thinking and communication in English. Try to listen closely, take notes if you like, and consider using these in your own speaking or journaling practice. 1. Airstrike. Definition: a military attack using aircraft, often targeting strategic locations. Example: the United States launched airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. 2. Sovereign nation. Definition: an independent country with full rights to govern itself. Example: Iran is a sovereign nation and condemned the attacks as a violation of its sovereignty. 3. Escalation. Definition: a situation becoming more intense or serious, especially in conflict. Example: many experts fear this could lead to a dangerous escalation in the region. 4. Strategic deterrence. Definition: a method of preventing action by demonstrating strength or threat. Example: some argue the attack was meant as a form of strategic deterrence. 5. Perception management. Definition: efforts to control or influence how people understand an event or idea. Example: governments often use media to engage in perception management. 6. Collateral damage. Definition: unintended harm to civilians or property during a military operation. Example: reports of collateral damage have raised concerns among human rights groups. 7. Narrative. Definition: a story or version of events that shapes public understanding. Example: every country promotes its own narrative to justify its actions. 8. Desensitized. Definition: having reduced emotional sensitivity to something due to frequent exposure. Example: young people today are often desensitized to images of war. 9. Rhetoric. Definition: language designed to persuade or influence, often emotionally. Example: the president's rhetoric emphasized strength and national pride. 10. Hidden agenda. Definition: a secret motive or plan behind a public action. Example: critics suspect that the airstrikes may have a hidden agenda beyond national security. 11. Independent thinking. Definition: the ability to form your own judgments rather than accepting others' opinions. Example: independent thinking is crucial in a world filled with conflicting messages. 12. Surface level versus underlying causes. Definition: the difference between what is visible or obvious and what is deeper or less seen. Example: surface level news tells you what happened. Real understanding requires looking at underlying causes. As you reflect on these words, consider how they apply to other events in the world. Try to use them in your own sentences, or write a short paragraph using at least 3 of these terms. Practicing in context helps you not only remember the vocabulary, but also understand how language shapes meaning. In the final part, we'll close with a thoughtful reflection, a seed for the next story, and a reminder that learning English is also about learning to stay awake to the world around you. Let's finish strong. So, what do we take away from all of this? The world is not simple. Headlines rarely tell the full story. And even words like peace, security, or freedom can be used to justify very different actions. The U.S. airstrikes on Iran's nuclear sites may be remembered as a bold decision that prevented disaster, or as a reckless move that pushed the world closer to another long, costly conflict. We don't yet know how history will judge this moment. But we do know how we respond to it, as learners, as thinkers, and as human beings. What matters most isn't that you pick a side, or that you memorize every fact. What matters is that you stay awake. That you keep asking hard questions. That you stay curious about the forces shaping the world. That you don't stop learning, not just the language, but the deeper meanings behind it. Because English isn't just about grammar and vocabulary. It's about access to truth, to ideas, to global conversations. And when you understand those conversations more clearly, you become more powerful, not in the way of armies or governments, but in the way of clarity, perspective, and voice. Let me leave you with one more question. If truth is often hidden, what responsibility do we have to look for it, to speak it, and to live by it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters here. And if this lesson helped you think more deeply, not just in English, but about the world, consider watching it again. You'll hear things differently the second time. That's the beauty of reflection. In our next episode, we'll explore a different kind of power, one that doesn't involve missiles or presidents, but data, influence, and the silent structures shaping what you see and believe online. Until then, stay thoughtful, stay curious, and remember, learning English is also learning to stay awake.